In the late 1960s, a quiet corner of northern Finland became the unlikely stage for one of the most mysterious UFO waves in modern history. The remote region of Pudasjärvi, known for its endless forests and isolated fells, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight as dozens of witnesses reported strange glowing orbs, eerie magnetic disturbances, and inexplicable encounters that spanned months. From farmers and teachers to taxi drivers and curious townsfolk, sightings of unidentified flying objects captivated the region, defying all scientific explanation. The events at Pudasjärvi were not only frequent, but disturbingly close, often witnessed in remarkable detail. Light orbs danced across the skies, hovered above frozen lakes, and moved with patterns so deliberate they seemed almost alive. Entire families woke in the middle of the night to find their homes illuminated by strange beams of light. Even animals reacted, with dogs howling and frantically leaping at windows as these enigmatic objects appeared. What made Pudasjärvi unique wasn't just the number of sightings, but the sheer variety and duration of the encounters. Some were distant flashes of light, others were descending orbs and pear-shaped objects, and one person even claimed to have been picked up by an alien ship. The ripple effects extended far beyond Finland, sparking intrigue among researchers and skeptics alike. So what really happened in this secluded corner of the Arctic? Was it a natural phenomenon, a secret government project, or something else entirely? Join us on Stories Lost as we uncover the strange and chilling mystery of the Pudasjärvi UFO wave, where the skies were anything but ordinary. In 1969, Finland experienced a surge in UFO sightings. Reports flooded in weekly, sometimes daily, across various regions. The hotspot was Pudasjärvi, about 100 kilometers northeast of Oulu. Here, sightings continued for at least 5 months. Initially, there were no officially documented close encounters in Pudasjärvi. However, the sightings attracted significant attention due to their exceptional duration and the large number of witnesses. Later, Finnish ufology accounts claimed that a close encounter had indeed taken place. In 1971, 2 Finnish brothers allegedly tried to shoot down a UFO in Pudasjärvi. It would also turn out that another local man claimed he was inside that very craft when the brothers shot at it. He even said he received the gift of healing from the alien beings, according to Finnish UFO researcher Tapani Koivula. We will cover this in a bit, but now, let's get back to how it all began. People had been seeing unidentified objects and lights around Pudasjärvi for years, and 1969 was no different. The focal point was around the Iso-Syöte fell, which reaches an altitude of 431 meters above sea level, a significant height in Finland, as there is no comparable elevation further south. The most remarkable sighting took place on September 8, 1969, in the early hours of the morning. Among the witnesses was a taxi driver, Atte Särkelä, who encountered the phenomenon while driving passengers through the countryside. His report, submitted to the Finnish UFO research organization, provided one of the most detailed descriptions of the event. What began as a distant light on the horizon soon developed into a series of strange and inexplicable encounters over the course of his journey. Särkelä's account offers a step-by-step record of the sightings, starting with the first glimmer of light beyond the hills. Sighting Location 1. We observed a bright light far ahead, beyond some hills. I had 6 passengers in my car. The light appeared to be an automobile light, visible from a great distance. The first sighting location was approximately 19 kilometers from the final sighting location. Sighting Location 2. We continued driving. About 1 kilometer further on, we saw another light on the side of the road. It appeared to be the same light as before, but this time it was closer, as if it was looking directly at us. And then we started noticing that there were no other cars near the lights or on the road. At that point, we realized that these lights could not belong to any vehicle. There were no known cars there. The light seemed to be moving. Sighting location 3. We came up to the third location. At this spot, we stopped the car to observe the light, which appeared to be moving. Our curiosity was fully engaged by this point. We quickly resumed driving to get a better view of the light from higher ground. Sighting location 4. As we got closer, our excitement grew. The glowing orb was now directly in front of us, visible between the tops of the trees. It seemed to move slightly. Sighting location 5. We covered some ground and then we saw it again. The orb was similar to the previous one, but it was no longer glowing. Sighting location 6. We observed many bright small orbs that moved rapidly back and forth between Särkelä and a deep ravine near a mountain. They would rise swiftly from the ground, move in zigzag patterns, hover almost stationary, move sideways, then dive down again into the ravine between the hills. Against Pudasjärvi Hill, there was a slightly larger orb moving slowly toward Taivalkoski, weaving in a zigzag motion through the air. In the upper left, a large orb was visible within a cloud, noticeably larger than the others. Below this orb was another flat orb, with a smaller one to its left. Sighting location 7. We then drove to the Särkelä village school. I woke up teacher Timo Lane and asked if he had a hunting rifle with a scope. He took it out and joined us. Teacher Timo Lane stepped outside with his wife to help us get a better look at whatever it was. Now they could see a large orb dimly visible within a cloud. According to Lane, the orb filled the entire field of view through the scope. A smaller orb was also visible far to the right. It appeared to be moving toward Taivalkoski before disappearing on the horizon. The large orb began to shrink rapidly, as if it had suddenly accelerated upward at high speed. According to research by the Oulu UFO Society, the first sightings of this phenomenon on September 8th were reported at around 1 a.m. at both Särkelä and Riitinki, approximately 20 kilometers west of Särkelä. Witnesses observed a light in the eastern sky, larger than the moon. There was also a report from Kuusamo of a light orb observed the same night at around 2 a.m. Teacher Timo Lane, 28 years old, estimated that the largest orb was at most a few kilometers away. The large orb appeared moon-sized to the naked eye, filling almost the entire field of view through the scope. Smaller orbs were observed hovering in the ravine, with some as close as 2 kilometers from the observers. The exact number of small orbs is unknown, but at least 10 were seen, and witnesses believe there may have been dozens. UFO researchers would later conduct radiation measurements at the presumed landing site of the small orbs, but found no abnormal levels. Interestingly, however, there is a known location near the observation area where compasses experienced strong magnetic disturbances, becoming completely unreliable. Professor Juhani Oxman, head of the electromagnetics department at the University of Oulu, stated that no natural explanation fitting current scientific knowledge could be found for the phenomenon. The mysterious orbs observed in Pudasjärvi remain unexplained UFOs. This case, however, was just one of many similar incidents. Throughout the year and in the months that followed, sightings of unidentified lights and flying objects continued in Finland. The most UFOs were seen in the skies over Pudasjärvi during October, especially in the early part of the month. On October 5th, a UFO was seen at Iso-Syöte, approximately 20 kilometers south of Särkelä. It was a marine blue S-shaped object, reported to be flying quite rapidly. It was clearly defined and emitted bright light. The sighting occurred at 1:30 a.m. On October 8th, a few people leaving the Pintamo dance hall saw 2 large light orbs for about 5 minutes. The sighting occurred at 1 a.m. On October 14th, taxi driver Atte Särkelä made another clear UFO sighting. The incident began at 4:01 a.m. in the same location where he had observed the first light orb on September 8th. At several kilometers distance, a bright orb was visible above a cleared logging area. I stopped the car and looked at the phenomenon with Mrs. Avanjärvi, who was with me. It started to rise and turned into a bright reddish-orange color, taking on a disc-like shape, and then rose into the clouds. As we began driving, it followed us at a distance of several kilometers, and about 150 meters in altitude. It followed us the entire 18-kilometer journey to Särkelä. I estimate the object's diameter to have been about 10 meters. When we arrived at the Särkelä school, I woke up Mrs. Lane, but before she could see it, the object disappeared to the east. The following night, at 2:30 a.m., a sun-sized glowing orb was seen near Iso-Syöte. It flew faster than an airplane heading eastward. In summary, regarding the incidents in September and October, all sightings were made after midnight. The UFOs never appeared very close to the witnesses. The usual distance was at least a kilometer. The objects were generally round in shape, bright, and glowing. During November and December, UFOs were no longer seen as often as in October, and fewer reports were received. However, the incidents began to take on a slightly different character. Sightings were now made earlier in the evening, and the objects appeared to come closer to witnesses, sometimes within just 100 meters. On November 28th, 2 separate UFO sightings were made. In the first case, the UFO was far away at first, but the observation period lasted nearly 2 hours. Around 10 p.m., farmer Kalle Lasala was sitting by the window of his house in Särkelä when he suddenly saw a bright light orb descending slowly straight down. He quickly woke his daughter, Aino Toivonen, who also observed the orb as it descended. The top of the orb emitted a wide beam of light directed toward the sky, which grew stronger the closer the orb came to the ground. The light orb landed behind a ridge, but the upward-directed light beam remained, strongly illuminating the surrounding area with a brightness comparable to daylight. The interior of Lasala's house was lit as brightly as during the day. The light beam was visible for 2 hours until it disappeared at midnight. A second sighting occurred during the same event at 10:45 p.m., about 6 kilometers from Lasala's house. 4 electric orbs of light, each about half a meter in diameter, were observed near a power line, close to the ground. One of the light orbs was visible for about 5 minutes before turning off its lights, while the others vanished shortly after being seen. Later, teacher Timo Lane and forest manager Apo Pudasjärvi used a compass to trace the direction of the UFO's descent, as described by Lasala. This led them to a ridge and 2 forest ponds, one of which was in the indicated direction. The men discovered an open ring-shaped area in the middle of the pond where water had melted through the ice. This phenomenon had never been observed at the pond before, but it is not certain whether the UFO had hovered directly above it. However, the direction matched the sighting. On December 13th, another intriguing incident occurred. Forester Heino Verila, 30 years old, his wife Elsa Verila, and soldier Ahti Kova were driving toward Särkelä, near Jääkelävaara. Slightly before 7 p.m., they noticed a bright light descending from the sky. After driving less than half a kilometer, an unusual light suddenly appeared from the right side of the road, moving directly in front of the car. The driver braked immediately, fearing the illuminated object would pass under the car, or rather, that the car would drive under it. The object was spindle or cone-shaped, about 50 centimeters wide and 150 centimeters tall, including a small downward-facing flame. The upper part glowed red, while the lower section was dark, with the flame directed downward, as though from a decelerating rocket motor. The object hovered about half a meter above the ground and maintained a steady distance of 50 to 60 meters ahead of the car. The car's speed had to be reduced significantly, though it did not slow to as little as 20 kilometers per hour, as the passengers were reluctant to approach too closely. Fear mixed with curiosity filled the car. After about 3 kilometers of driving, the object suddenly ascended into the light beam of the car and veered off the road. Nearly at the same time, the car's headlights illuminated a man walking along the road, heading in the same direction as the object. The object seemed to notice the man, abruptly rising sharply into the air and veering left, taking cover in the forest. By then, the object had flown about 2.8 kilometers in front of the car. This case was unusual because the unidentified flying object was observed in front of the car. UFOs typically follow vehicles from behind. Its appearance was unconventional, and the witnesses were reliable, making the case difficult to dispute. Additionally, the civil defense manager of Pudasjärvi visited the scene to conduct a radiation survey. The start of a new decade did not mark the end of UFO sightings in Pudasjärvi. Reports continued into the 1970s. The first notable sighting occurred on January 8th. Housewife Seni Ritinki, around 12 noon, was on her way to a neighbor's house to do laundry. As she reached the roadside, she experienced one of the most startling events of her life. Looking southward into the bright daylight sky, she saw an enormous pear-shaped light formation stretching across the road and reaching the height of a telephone pole. It hovered just above the ground, emitting a strong red beam of light from its lower section. The brightness of the UFO was so intense that it blinded Mrs. Ritinki. Frightened, she ran back home to get others to see the phenomenon. However, no one else was nearby except her son, Pertti Ritinki, who soon joined her. By the time he arrived, the UFO had moved off the road just as a mail bus was approaching. It was now only visible in the forest, about 100 meters from the witnesses. The object soon moved deeper into the forest and disappeared. A similar pear-shaped UFO was seen 2.5 hours later in Laitavaara, about 20 kilometers away, observed by mail and school bus drivers. On January 28th, another sighting occurred at Särkelä, where multiple UFOs were observed. This event resembled the sightings of September 8th. At 1:40 a.m., Atte Särkelä, 19 years old, noticed his living room filling with a pulsing light. Looking outside, he saw a bright moon-sized orb hovering over Särkelä hill, its glow shining through the window. He quickly woke his father to witness the phenomenon. The large orb stopped, and 4 smaller orbs detached from it. The last of these smaller orbs turned away briefly, before returning near the larger orb. The orb dimmed, then moved eastward, ascending as it disappeared into a cloud. The smaller orbs descended and faded. The sighting lasted 7 minutes. About 3 hours earlier, at 10:30 p.m., Salma Ramstedt and Aune Valkonen had observed a large red orb over a nearby hill. It moved up and down repeatedly, before eventually vanishing into the clouds. On the final night of January, numerous dancers returning from a nearby event witnessed a UFO at the Perja Road intersection. There were a large number of witnesses. That night, electricity was cut off across a wide area. A UFO was seen near a main power line, and dogs were also hysterical during this night. According to Finnish UFO researcher Tapani Koivula, one of the most sensational incidents in Pudasjärvi's UFO history occurred in the winter of 1971, when 2 Finnish brothers allegedly attempted to shoot down a UFO. Later, a local man contacted Tapani and claimed he had been inside the craft, where he received the gift of healing from alien beings. A Finnish man sometimes responds to UFO encounters like the U.S. Air Force by bringing out heavy weaponry to ensure security, Koivula says. According to him, this is what happened in Pudasjärvi when 2 brothers, Heino and Seppo Kelolampi, encountered UFOs while clearing snow. The men worked as snowplow operators, clearing local roads with a tractor. Within a short period, UFOs appeared several times, again and again. Soon, the brothers began to feel threatened. Eventually, the older brother declared that if they showed up again, he would take his hunting rifle and shoot, Koivula recounts. When the younger brother later went out to plow the road again, he returned in a panic, running inside and shouting, "Now those devils are here!" The older brother, true to his word, grabbed his hunting rifle from the wall and ran outside in just his underwear, despite the minus 20 degrees Celsius cold, to open fire. His younger brother meanwhile bolted straight under the bed. He fired multiple shots and was convinced he had hit the UFO, yet it still vanished into the sky. After the shooting, both men were out on the road, searching on their hands and knees, Koivula says. Their wives and children later recalled that they believed the rifle was such a powerful weapon that logically, there should have been at least some UFO debris on the ground. But nothing was ever found. The case took a strange turn in 1997 when, at a UFO seminar in Pudasjärvi, a local man named Unto approached Koivula. He claimed to have been inside the UFO 3 times, including the night the brothers shot at it. The beings, described as slender, about 160 centimeters tall, and wearing protective suits that covered everything but their faces, reacted with shock when the bullets started flying. They asked Unto, "Why are they shooting?" Koivula says. All Unto could do was respond, "We are so primitive." What made Unto's testimony particularly compelling was that his description of the aftermath matched almost word for word what one of the brothers, Seppo Kelolampi, had privately told his cousin Anja, a local UFO researcher who had never met Unto before his death. Shortly after the shooting, the UFO landed in the brothers' yard, hovering a few meters above the ground. 3 beings floated out of the craft. One of them engaged Seppo Kelolampi in a long conversation. With eerie calmness, the being informed Seppo that he would soon die, Koivula recounts. What made it even more unsettling was that the entity seemed to know Seppo's personal affairs in great detail. And yet, the tone of the conversation remained wise and gentle, not menacing. When the conversation ended, 2 of the beings floated back into the craft, but the third took an unexpected route. It drifted toward a nearby tree, and instead of returning to the UFO, vanished into the sky through the branches. The beings also had another message for the brothers: they would die in the near future. Supposedly, this wasn't meant as a punishment, but as a warning about their poor health, Koivula explains. A few years later, both passed away from sudden seizures. Unto, meanwhile, claimed the beings had given him a gift, the ability to heal. He practiced it for the rest of his life. His reputation as a healer even spread beyond Finland. He even told me he had treated Boris Yeltsin himself, Koivula recalls. There was never any evidence to suggest the beings had caused the brothers' deaths. After all, Koivula concludes, the creatures had only known better than humans. And so, the Pudasjärvi UFO wave leaves us with a story as strange as the northern skies where it unfolded. For months, glowing orbs darted across the treetops, hovered over ponds, and lit up the lives of those who witnessed them. The accounts were vivid, the details often uncanny. But as with so many UFO stories, the evidence falls short of answering the big question. What were they? Were these sightings the work of anything unearthly? Or were they just natural phenomena misunderstood by the human mind? The truth, as always, is hard to pin down. Sure, there's no denying the genuine awe and confusion felt by those who saw these lights. But without physical proof, no spacecraft, no artifacts, it's easy to see why skepticism surrounds the events. Still, it saddens us when people outright dismiss it. The Pudasjärvi wave isn't just about what was seen. It's about how it made people feel. In a world that often demands certainty, these sightings reminded us of the thrill of the unknown, the pull of the mysterious. Whether you believe it was aliens, experimental aircraft, or simply nature playing tricks, the legacy of Pudasjärvi lies in its ability to spark wonder and debate. So, what do you think happened in Finland in 1969? Was it something out of this world, or just something out of the ordinary? Let us know your thoughts, and remember to like, subscribe, and join us next time on Stories Lost, as we continue our quest to uncover more forgotten stories. This week, we'd like to welcome our new members. We also want to thank everyone who bought us a coffee on buymeacoffee.com and those who gave us super thanks. Your support means everything to us. See you next week.